Hello and welcome everyone to today's episode of the Afghanistan podcast. Joining us today, we have Professor Majid Sharifi. Professor Sharifi is a professor of international relations and the director of international affairs at Eastern Washington University, EWU. Professor Sharifi, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Professor, I was hoping to maybe discuss the 12-day war that took place between Iran and Israel and its aftermath. But before we get to that, maybe just for some context, to start with, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? You were born and brought up in Iran, but you're currently in America. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, I was born in Iran and educated in Iran to a certain extent, but I've been in the United States for over 50 years. But I have never lost my connection to Iran. I often go back there, and because of my job and my profession, I have written books on Iran and the Middle East, and focus on that area. So I am a so-called, it may sound arrogant, but I've been involved with the history and the events of the Middle East from different sociological, economic, and political perspectives for decades. And because I'm so old already, I am a sort of a walking history book, because I have seen changes, political changes in my life. And beside my whole existence, being in America as a diasporic individual and being where I am from the position of my perspective and all that, it's been, beside academic, it's been experiential, in the sense that I have been impacted by the politics of the Middle East and international relations and so on and so forth, from pretty much from my childhood.
Of course. Of course.
And so was, of course, my father.
I can imagine. How old were you when you immigrated to USA?
Early 20s.
Wow. Professor, you've written a book, I think it's called Imagining Iran, and it's to do with nationalism and national identity in Iran. I'd love to talk about that in a little bit as well. But before that, I feel in Iran, there's a wide spectrum of opinions, of national identities and narratives. And I guess all of them are valid, but it would be really interesting to know where you stand so that we can put things into a context during this conversation. So to begin with, what is your opinion on the Iranian Revolution as it happened, but also as it stands now?
Well, first, this is a multifaceted question. Let's work with the whole idea of nationalism, whether it's Islamic nationalism, Shi'i nationalism, Islamic Republic nationalism, and all other versions of nationalism. And of course, this doesn't apply only to Iran. It, ironically or paradoxically, or maybe unsurprisingly, better word for it, it applies to Turkey and Pakistan and Afghanistan and India to a certain extent, and to a large extent, and Iraq and all of the rest of the countries that are small powers or middle powers in the international order of imperialistic international order. In my book, I argue that nationalism as we know it, and as pretty much everybody knows, emerged in Europe as a Western imperialist concept to control the domestic situation in there. And at the same time, it created, of course, just like many other concepts that were imported into the colonized world, and nationalism were imported And unfortunately, most of it is colonized or colonized version of nationalism. And of course, because in Europe, first the state emerged, sovereign state, sovereign territorial, modern sovereign territorial state emerged, and out of that state, it made nation states in its own image with the hard and soft power it had, and it globalized it. But in areas like Iran, the state was weak. It imitated nationalism, but the state was never and is never strong to create its own nation in its own image. And so nationalism have had many, many, many versions, and many of them are usually a sort of ideology in contestation of the state, whatever state there has been. Like in the example of Iran, of course, we had nationalism, oppositional nationalism against the regime of Shah of Iran from its inception. And within that, there were so many contestations. What is the meaning of Iranianness? And within that, there was, of course, the meaning of Islamicness. And what is the real meaning of Islamicness in that? And of course, then we had the revolution in Iran in 1979. It was a hegemonic movement against anti-imperialism, the desire for national sovereignty and creation of a nationhood. But I argue that of course, was defeated in a sense because one version of nationalism came to emerge and take over. And that is the state official nationalism, and still continues. But unfortunately for Iran, just like, of course, Iran is not unique, just like other sort of middle power, small power, not great powers, the state has not been able to completely nationalize its own official identity. And that creates a lot of problem. And of course, it's not only the fault of, this is not a one-way street to blame any particular governing regime, but it is to say that is the world order in a sense, the way it is hierarchically structured in such a way that small powers always are contested from within and from without. And within, usually, whoever side is protected or supported by imperial powers, sometimes they gain more software power, if not hardware.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
I find that very interesting and somewhat counterintuitive because I'm based in the UK. I have relatives in Pakistan. I've spent a lot of time in Pakistan. So when I look at Pakistan, I can see that there is that desire to create a stronger national identity because at the end of the day, Pakistan as a Pakistani state is a new creation, relatively new, created in 1947. Before that, there was no Pakistani nation, or so we had Punjabis, Sindhis, Balochis. They all happened to be Muslims, but they linguistically, culturally were very different. But when I look at a country like Iran or Turkey or Egypt, I was imagining that because of the historic nature of the nationhood, which predates statehood, I thought it would be a much greater sense of an identity there. So that's quite revealing for me. That's quite interesting. I was also talking to Professor Khalid Blankenship. I'm not sure if you know of him. I was speaking to him last week, and we were talking about the negative impact of nationalism and how nationalism, from an Islamic religious point of view, can go to a point where it becomes like idolatry because people start seeing nationalism and national symbols over and beyond everything else. It's very interesting and somewhat counterintuitive for me, what you were just saying, and very revealing. In a way, it makes me think in ways that I haven't thought about this thing before, because my background is from Pakistan. In Pakistan, I think we've struggled to create that national identity because Pakistan is relatively a new country that was created in 1947. Before that, there was no Pakistani nation as such. There was Sindhis, Punjabis, Balochis, um, all Muslims. So they probably had a Muslim identity, but there was no Pakistani identity, which is kind of being manufactured in some ways. And I think in the past, so I've studied a little bit about the differences between nations, ethnic groups, and states. And given that the Iranian nation or ethnic group pre-existed the state of Iran, um, similar to maybe Turkey and Egypt, I would have thought that it would have been the Iranian national identity would have been a lot stronger. It wouldn't be the same kind of problems that we face in Pakistan. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Do you think there is a difference of like states like Iran, Turkey, and Egypt compared to something like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these countries, or do you think they all fall more or less in the same category?
Well, yes and no. Qualitatively, yes, they are different. Certainly, Iran has a huge history behind it, and the plateau of Iran has been a country for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah.
Iran as a country is there. That identity exists. And of course, the same thing was with Ottoman Empire for a while. But now it's Turkey, which made it to be more of an ethnic nationalism, focusing on the Turkish nationalism, and of course, eliminating the 20-25% of its population were non-Turkic. So Iran has been a multi-nation state, and as a country, it had a whole lot more opportunity to have that Iranian glue, that history that binds them, and it still does. So qualitatively is different from, let's say, Pakistan.
Mhm.
But having just one history and one identity, whether it is territorial identity like Iran is a territorial identity that has applied to Kurds, Baluch, Turks, Fars or Parsis, or Turkish, Gilaks, Lors, Arabs. So in that sense, that territorial identity is very strong, and it probably can play a significant role, but that's not enough in and of itself. The same thing as we can say Pakistan. Pakistan is a great comparative point with Iran. Pakistan created itself as the land of the pure, the land of the Muslim, the land of, so Islamic identity was supposed to be the foundation
Yes.
of all of these at least four great ethnic groups that constituted. But as you know, perhaps better than I do, that Islamic identity was supposed to be an overall identity that, like an umbrella, a thin skin stretching over all of these four other ethnic identities, which were happen to be and usually is linguistically and territorially are different too. But unfortunately, it didn't. And you know better than I that under General Zia,
Yeah.
a particular version of Islam became that umbrella. But that umbrella was so thin, so conflicting, so contextual, and so so abusive of other identities, and so oppressive that obviously oppositional identities emerged. And of course, the state failed to make Islam to be the true foundation, a grounding work for the unity of Pakistan. So that was a failure. In Iran, of course, the Iranian territorial identity was and is a great foundation for Iran. But then we have had from there pretty much similar to what Zia did with Islam during the Pahlavi regime. It was the Persianness that took over the Iranian territorial, and that Persian chauvinism, oppression, and of course, not recognizing the ethnic identities of others as much, that domineering version of monarchic Persian power kind of went so far as alienating another foundational identity in Iran, which has been around for a long, long time, for 1400 years almost, if maybe less, maybe more. And that's Islamic identity. So that became in conflict with the Islamic identity. And it was purposeful. It was idiotic, but the idea was, in order for Iran to become developed, modern, which is again colonizing concepts imported from the West, with a particular meaning, modernization and modernity became colonial modernity and equated with westernization. So westernization in Iran went so far that it alienated and it became an oppositional force, social, psychological, religious, cultural, linguistically, behavioral, against the supposedly Iranian wannabe modern, wannabe Western. And so was 1979. Revolution became the crescendo of this conflict. And the Iranians felt that, well, Iranian identity, territorial identity, and Islamic identity are integrated with each other so deeply that Iranian Islamic Republic would be a combination that could work. And in fact, it could have, and it has. It has longer than any other the regime, any other way of doing it. But then again, there has been weakness on the part of the ruling elites in Iran not to make this intersectionalities of identities in Iran to converge and to create a cohesive a national identity that identifies with the state as ours. Pretty much that failure, we can see it in Pakistan, where most people don't identify with the state as their own. It's oppositional in a sense. And we have, so the state in a sense has not become truly nationalized. And for a state to become truly nationalized, it obviously cannot be based on, it has to bring different identities under its umbrella.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and am a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode. Yeah. Professor, what is the right balance between nationalism and like a global identity? Because on one hand, I was talking to Professor Khalid Blankenship last week, and he was pointing, I think rightly so, that nationalism, if taken too far, um, from an Islamic point of view, is like idolatry, is a symbol that replaces um, God or what we worship in some ways. On the other hand, we have like I've had a number of guests on this show from like Iranian background who their grievance with the Islamic revolution was that the current state in Iran is more um, it's more dedicated to the Islamic cause than to the Iranian cause, and their thoughts are that the Iranian government is almost willing to sacrifice Iran for Islam. Um, so how do we establish that balance? Where do you think Iran should be sitting? Like what in terms of the relationship that Iran has with Lebanon, with Yemen, with used to have with Syria? Do you think that is at a cost of Iranian own identity?
Well,
Hello?
I think I don't know about the intention, but in practical terms, in fact, the Islamic identity, for whatever reason, and we can go, that's a different discussion how it became like that.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the intention, but the idea of that intersectionality to make sure that sort of Iranian identity, pretty much like it was for, let's say, many of the activists, including myself, in the late 1970s, that Iranian Islamic identity of the sort of Islamic identity which is democratic, cosmopolitan, humanistic, progressive, like Ali Shariati and people like that, to a certain extent, or Jalal al-Ahmad, or many, many other scholars, or many other even people that were secular, in fact, that could identify with Islam and the story of Islam and Islamic story, history, the narrative of Islamicness, as not contradictory to progress, humanistic, human-centric, sovereignty, and anti-colonialism. And of course, it was mismanaged. And the attempt, I think that point has been realized for the last 20, 30 years, especially since the 12-Day War. But that's a work to be done. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do, to bringing these identities together. And of course, it is a difficult thing. Having that intersectionality, having that convergence of different identities, do not necessarily need to be against each other. Let me say this: the concept of Ummah for all Muslims exists. Ummah is not territorial. It's an identity of Muslims identifying with each other as brothers and sisters. Now, this Ummah could be very powerful identity connecting Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Lebanon, all of the Muslim nations together. But that Ummah, from the state perspective, and these are colonial projects, have been divided to Sunnis, Shiites, this and that and the other. So it has lost the power, the original power of being under the same God, the same history, the same gesture, the same cultural identity of hospitality, kindness, being on the side of the weak, not the strong. there are lots of cultural trait in Ummah. But unfortunately, Ummah has been constructed to be oppositional to modernity.
Yeah.
And that is shameful. And that shame is, of course, on the part of many of the clergy, both in the Sunni Islam and Shiites and other sects. But also, it's a project of an imperialist project. And it's been going on for 150, 200, 300 years since colonialism. And on the part of Iran, it has been definitely a failure on that, to bring Iranianness and Islamicness not to be contradictory, even though the rhetoric is not. But some of the behaviors has been, and plus other mistakes. And I think that was the same with, of course, Zia.
Yeah.
Zia was a great case of fragmenting that Ummah into a very narrow ideological perspective that by its very nature of who's Muslim, who's not, who's infidel, who's a believer, who's not believer, made it so narrow that the inside and outside became so clearly cut from each other. And that was a failure.
Yeah.
The last point I want to say is that for example, this is an idealistic point of view at this point in time, but it is doable with the cosmopolitan, human-centric, progressive notion of Ummah. And Ummah, from even the sacred text, I'm not a religious person particularly, and I can't talk to religious texts or about them, but I can pretty much from my background and knowing that Ummah is not necessarily conflictory with other Ummah, Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and all the rest, or Zoroastrian and all the rest. And of course, we could go back to the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the other empires with Muslim identity, and other minorities, religious, ethnic minorities, lived in peace with each other. Pakistan is again another great example, as Iran is. Christians were there, Shiites were there, Hindus were there, and so the whole idea of being cosmopolitan, having a global identity as human beings, regardless of our ideology, is open, in an open question. But that construction has been, in fact, been destroyed in a sense, or attacked. I'm hoping for a day, and that was my argument in the conclusion of my book, I'm hoping for a day that the Ummah is strong, regional, and they cooperate with each other, not necessarily on their differences, but on their unity and their history, and their common idea of the book, the belief, the cultural, the language, how close we are to each other. But unfortunately, we have been divided. And we work toward that division more than unity.
This is so interesting because for the past 2 or 3 episodes, I've been discussing this whole concept of Ummah with different people, Professors John Esposito, Mark Juergensmeyer. They even refused to entertain the concept of an Ummah, even though I was trying to say that, like, as a Muslim, when I meet another person in Syria or Iraq or Iran with a similar background, instantly I have this sense of bonding with them. That just is, for me, it seems like it's a unique thing, but I might be mistaken. But from my point of view, I think it's a shame that this identity of an Ummah, which could be a very strong and a very productive kind of a power, has been eroded because of this whole states and everyone divided into different states. I completely agree that it would be good to have a day when different states, Islamic states, can cooperate with each other over their similarities and have a stronger regional identity, if not even a global identity. I wanted to talk a little bit more about maybe Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, because all three of these countries have a lot of similarities, and all three of these countries, I think, where they are now, has been driven to a large extent, degree, by the interference of America, and them trying to resist the powers of America. Um, and because of that, I think the narrative that has been built individually with all three of these countries, it's interesting how they might have developed it historically. Relationships were different with USA, but I think it's because of the Soviet Union proximity and the Cold War. This is where we've ended up. So we have that kind of combined experience that we've had resisting the Soviets and also resisting the Western pressures. How do you see, at least after this whole war, 12-day war, I see a much bigger opportunity for at least Iran and Pakistan to come closer together. Recently, we had the Iranian president over in Pakistan. I think there was a lot of sympathy in Pakistan for Iran in that 12-day war. How do you see that in terms of regional shift in regional alignments in South Asia?
Well, I'm not hopeful, even though the potential is there. Obviously, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and the rest of those neighborhoods, but specifically those three countries, Afghanistan and Iran and Pakistan, that have been betrayed, invaded, violated, and attacked, and using incentives and disincentives to be a part of this colonizing imperialistic balance of power. And Pakistan obviously played into it in the 1980s. It is still playing into it. Afghanistan have done it under every regime that has come to power, despite that ideology. And Iran has done its own. Iran has done its own balancing.
Yeah.
And that's because we, in general, in these three countries, and of course, Turkey has become a part of the Western NATO imperialistic colonizing empire. And right now, its little baby Azerbaijan is cooperating to yet another attack, yet another front, create yet another division in this region. And Iraq, of course, Saddam did it. And of course, we know the Gulf state. They totally in alliance with the West, not with the Ummah. Just taking a look, and when I say Ummah, I don't mean it to be an oppositional, anti-Western, because I'm not anti-Western. I'm not anti-cosmopolitan idea. I'm not anti-globalization in a humanistic globalization. We are all humans after all, but it is a part of the alliances of Western colonial countries. And of course, this balance of power as an ideology, as a colonizing, anti-human, horrible ideology is the dominant ideology among these states. And every state in the region think about national interest. And it has become so natural, so ordinary to say national interest and define national interest in terms of the state interest in a selfish, self-organizing, self-centrist idea of balance of power against each other. But something is missing in this balance of power game. The whole idea of national interest and balancing your power against other states. And what is missing is the whole colonializing world order. World order is not an equal order where every nation state has equal power to balance against each other. Balance of power is an ideology of Western colonizing power. Why? Because in the current global order, only great powers can balance. Middle power like Iran or Pakistan are have become instruments. And we can see the shifts, always shifts, one side here, one side there, do this, do that. I have always been instrument of that game that Brzezinski called the great game, the great chess. It's a game to manipulate middle and small powers. Small powers like Qatar and UAE or right now, unfortunately, Iraq, because it has been divided. And Jordan. These are small powers that have no say. They are not sovereign state. It's a misnomer to call them a nation states. And they are not nation states. Israel or Palestine, if they be to be a state. These are performative, weak states that cannot balance. Yet, this shows how colonized our mind has become. Yet, every one of the states in the region has accepted this imperialistic theory and practice with no critical understanding. Our universities teach balance of power, and they adopted those vocabulary. They don't say, well, of course, there is no other choice either, but we are not looking for any other choice either. So,
very true.
So as long as there is balance of power, we will be an instrument of great powers to shape us the way they want us to be shaped. I don't know. This is a very abstract theoretical argument, and maybe I don't know.
No, I see your point. I definitely see your point. But I'm also wondering, do you see hope, or do you see more of a desperate situation with the rise of China? Because as I see it, the rise of China is producing a different system parallel to the Western system that we're used to, because the West has this geopolitical system that is based on domination and a zero-sum game. Whereas with China, it seems like they're not so much interested in geopolitics, but more in geo-economics. And in terms of economics, you can have a win-win situation where different nations can get together in a way that it's not a zero-sum game. If one benefits, then the other benefits, which is in some ways what we're seeing with BRI and in terms of Pakistan, the CPEC. Do you see hope in this new system that's emerging, or do you see more of the same?
I'm optimistic, but not too optimistic in a sense. But it is true that with the rise of China and Russia and BRICS and the emergence of multipolarity, the chances for middle powers and small powers to be able to have a little bit more sovereign will and a higher degree of freedom into what they need to do might be higher. It's been always higher. Now, of course, we went through many decades of bipolarity between the Soviet Union and the West. And in that bipolarity, even though India and other countries tried to create the third way, the third world in a sense, but they didn't succeed. They were boxed into choosing one side or the other. And as Nixon said and Kissinger said, that there is no choice. Either you're with us or against us.
Yes.
And in practical terms, it was like that, except on the marginal issues. Exactly. Some places like Iran or Pakistan played it. But then the fall of the Soviet Union created a unipolar world. And that began from 1990s all the way to 2010, 15 in a sense, maybe 16, maybe even 20s. We are still at the end of that era where the United States became either you with me or you against the rest of the world. And it pushed it. Now, for the last 10 years or so, new liberalism, human rights laws, the US-led liberal imperialism is falling apart, partly due to its own policies and partly to the rise of China and Russia and Iran and other countries, India. And these interests based on that ideology of balance of power among the empires, great powers, is creating in a natural way of things. Natural is putting it into quotation. It's not natural. It's all human construct. It's creating an opportunity. It's creating. But at the same time, I say it's optimistic that this multipolarity may change the world order and would create a higher degree of freedom for countries like Pakistan and Iran. But at the same time, historically, the most dangerous moment in our time has been when an empire is declining and is trying to retain its power, not through economic expansion and control, because economic, geopolitics and geo-economics are two sides of the same coin, but through actually military and domination. That is really, really, really dangerous. And we are at that moment. And in fact, in the 1900s, China, yes, China is more focused on geoeconomics. But then again, US, which was not a global power in the early 1900s, it was also focusing on geoeconomics, not geopolitics, not military. US was not in the Middle East at all, or in Africa, or hardly in Europe. It was a continental power, and it dominated Latin America, and it grew. But once it became a global power, especially after World War II, it created, its order, at least for the Western world. And now that order is falling apart. And in this falling apart, the role of countries like Iran and Pakistan are as important as Russia.
Yes.
And India.
I completely
But
agree.
then again, that ideology, unfortunately, that perspective, that vision is not there because the state elites in these countries are not necessarily educated. They're very educated in the politics of the colonizing politics of balance of power. They're very well conversed with that. But they not like you and I, that academically they take one step back away from their tribal, ethnic, ideological, political power position and look at the bigger picture.
Yes. I very much agree. I think it is a very dangerous time simply because the West is declining, and a declining West is more dangerous than an established and dominating West, which we're seeing. Absolutely, you're right. But I also see lots of hope because before unipolar system that we currently have, when we used to have a bipolar system, at least smaller nations had some options where they can go to one side or the other. And with the multipolar world that's emerging, I'm hoping that is going to create a lot more opportunities for smaller countries. But I have a lot of hope for, especially Iran and Pakistan, apart from anything else, because of their geographical proximation. They're very critically needed by Russia for the North-South corridor, access to warm waters. They will play a crucial role for China, but I think even the West will really need a better relationship with these countries. So I do see a lot of hope there as well. But I wanted to, Professor Sharifi, also talk to you about, because it's so important what's happened in this 12-day war between Iran and Israel. How do you see the relationship between Iran and Israel to begin with? Like, um, Iran has been the one country that has been playing the most crucial role in resistance against the West, against Israel in the region. Um, how do you see that role? Do you agree with that role, or do you think that comes at the cost of Iranian nationhood and Iranian economy? But how do you also see this regional, again,
Well, I
balance of
don't.
power?
Yeah. Well, that's a misperception or myth that if Iran was a good boy, to not to be pejorative about, but good boy, and was submissive and complied with Washington and the West, and actually embraced Israel as a colonial settler state, which is apartheid, racist, and genocidal, and criminal, and all of that. Let's say, just assume for a second that Iran would do that.
Yeah.
Some Iranian thinks that they would be better off.
Yes.
Then if that's the case, we could say Iraq should be better off. It's not.
Very true.
Jordan should be better off. They're not. Pakistan complied with U.S. policies for many, many decades, and it still does. It's still the Iranian gas, which gas pipeline comes to Pakistan border, and then, of course, Pakistan doesn't take it from there.
You were mentioning that Pakistan, the gas pipeline that goes from Iran and comes to Pakistani borders, stops there because of the pressure from the West.
Yes, exactly. Or packet. I mean, of course, that is only an example of this pressure taken and applied and taken, meaning that this is a reciprocal thing. U.S. power is much more powerful when there is a recipient.
Yes.
Now, Iranian government, because of its own perspective, has resisted that. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And but going back to the original question, that's not the case for the region because the dominant ideology is that. And of course, this is so prominent with Turkey. And right now with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is putting all of its eggs in the basket of NATO and Turkey. Unfortunately, a few hundred miles to its north, it saw what happened to Ukraine.
Yes.
Ukraine will never recover for the next 50, 60 years. And that's a shame. That's a shame that something like that happened. And, so Azerbaijan. So we're talking about Iraq. Iraq, after all of these years, still has a U.S.-made constitution. It's so ironic and sad for a country which most of it has gone through so much pain.
Yes.
And it is still that constitution is based on Shiite Sunni Kurds. So it's not a nation state. It's 3 ethnic enclaves. And Kurdistan has been, unfortunately, despite my sympathy to the Kurdish plight for hundreds of years.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they have now become an instrument of Israel. The same thing as Azerbaijan. You see, when I say weak power get fed by this global colonial order and becomes the instrument of destroying, of course, this dividing and conquering and ruling. So we are in that at that point. Yes, Iran has paid a lot, but it has no other choice either.
Yes.
The it is an excuse, or it's a pretension, it's a fake thing that if Iran gives up its nuclear program, it can be accepted. No, it cannot be accepted. Iran is too strong, too unified of a country, too powerful for it to stand.
Yes.
It needs it to stand. It has to be broken.
Absolutely.
And the whole long-term strategy is to break it apart.
Yes. Because already they started saying that it's not going to stop in uranium enrichment. They wanted Iran to abandon its missiles, to abandon its links with other countries. So it doesn't stop with uranium. But Professor, how, following the 12-day war, what is the situation in Iran with the uranium enrichment program? Does it still exist? Will it continue?
First of all, a disclaimer. I have no connection with the Iranian government or any institution or organization in the United States or in Iran or anywhere else. Every opinion I express is my own personal opinion, and I probably can defend it with evidence, but this is not the place to bring evidence. But then some of it is only speculation. And this, responding to this question, is very speculative, because I have no idea that what is going on in the circle of powers and what the capacities are. But I can pretty much, not I, but many, many people can see that Iran has been put into a box. And out of that box, there are only two solutions: submission, to let Iran be divided. Because when you say, give up your missile program, give up your nuclear program, give up your regional interference, the so-called interference, meaning that don't do anything, don't trade with Iraq, be submissive. And of course, with that, allowing Israel to just make a Gaza out of Tehran. Eventually. Whatever they don't like, it's going to be a Syria or
a Libya.
Or Libya. You know, so divide it, break it apart to 7, 8 different parts. And if they don't break apart because of the historical connection in Iran, which is kind of hard to do that because of that territorial identity that we talked about before, if not do that, make a weak, incompetent, contested government that under the name of democracy, every other day we have a different prime minister, and every other day it's a whole different strategy. And it's not going to work. It's going to be weak. It's not going to be centralized. The whole idea of decentralizing Iran has been on the plan for a long, long time. So the elites in Iran, and I don't care if these people go and other people, I mean, if they want to break Iran up, they can by doing that. But they have no choice. So they have to resist, and resistance costs. And in that sense, I believe the Iranian missile program will expand. The Iranian nuclear program going to go underground and undeclared, and perhaps develop nuclear weapons. Perhaps, I don't know, but that's in the odds. And a war is coming. I see more chances of war than peace. And negotiation is useless, because the aim of the two countries, Iran on the one hand and the West on the other hand, are just incommensurable. They don't meet each other.
Yes.
You know, one purpose is to destroy and fragment and divide and weaken Iran and change the regime. And the regime change is not, it's huge. They want to change the the structure of Iran. And on the other hand, the only option left is resistance. And this is the only option that has been in the hands of Iranian elites. Not that they managed it so well, in my critical opinion, for the last 40 years. And I think Pakistan is in the same situation. The elites know that if they resist, they probably gonna be, out of power, and they've been selfish enough not to resist.
Absolutely. I think this is the whole problem with the Western attitude of zero-sum diplomacy, where anyone that comes in the way has to completely surrender and completely come into the fold. But given that, I think it's completely logical and rational for Iran to decide that its only way is to develop nuclear weapons and that the nuclear program will go underground. I can't see any other way. So the West is pushing Iran into that direction. But Professor, when you say a war is coming, do you mean a war between Iran and USA or Iran and Israel? Or do you see no difference in those two?
Well, I don't make a clear distinction between Israel and US. Israel would not exist without US, could not be a dominant power in US. It's an extension of US foreign policy in the Middle East. And even from the Obama time, when the pivot to China, which has been the long-term strategy of US to maintain its hegemony, its global hegemony, of course, and even before that, really, when you think about it, Israel has been the proxy, the ally, the camp, the country that is supposed to keep Middle East divided and in war and weak and dominated by Western corrupt elite in alliance, submissive in alliance with the United States, to buy billions of dollars of worthless military equipment. All the junks that are obsolete are flooded there, and have a great police system, great repressive system, and great racist system, and push on little issues, the small ethnic issues. Oh, we are Sunnis, we are Kurds, we are, all these ethnic identities, promoting them as freedom. Freedom of Kurds, freedom of Sunnis, freedom of Shiites, freedom of everywhere there is a freedom, freedom. The content of it is nothing but sectarian, ethnic conflict. None of this need to exist.
Yeah.
With Ummah or without Ummah.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think Islam is lucky in a way that we have a lot less sectarian division than, let's say, Christianity. But it's very unfortunate to see how, as soon as a country, a state is weakened, sectarian violence just seems to be the norm in all of Middle East. And I don't know if this is a modern thing or if this is like a continuation of a historic kind of but I do hope that we'll see a difference emerging, especially with the improving relationships between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Let's hope. Professor, one of my last questions or topic was to ask you about the role of Russia in this 12-day war with Israel. Does Iran feel let down that Russia didn't help, or do you think that Russia did what Russia was able to do before the war started and diplomatically during the war?
Russia is a great power and has used Iran as an instrument of its own so-called national interest. And it's a regional power. Iran is important to it, but it has its own limitation. To expect Russia to be to defend Iran is, first of all, impractical, and then besides, it's not knowing Russia. I think depending on what happens in Ukraine in the next few months, Russia does not want to see Iran fall apart and become yet another front, southern front. At the same time, wanting and wishing and having the capacity to actually do it is not necessarily in its capacity. But meanwhile, Russia is a great player of the balance of power. And at this point in time, because Russia doesn't have the dream or the idea of being a globalized power like US. It wants to be a regional power, not global power to that extent at this point in time. So because it can't project power as much as US, or not even half of it, it does have destructive power, but it doesn't have constructive power. So in that sense, Russia is playing a very devilish, demonic, deceptive role. It's a double game in a sense. On the one hand, it defends Iran, but on the other hand, it sells Iran for a higher price. So this is the situation, of course, that U.S. has treated Pakistan in the same way.
Yes.
And other countries. But all great powers do that to the middle powers. They use them as instruments of their thing. So whenever it's in interest and it can take some advantage, like in this summit that is coming up with Putin, I'm sure Iran is going to be one of those issues discussed. And if Putin can get enough advantage on its western front and northern front with Ukraine, yes, it may sell some part of Iran, but it won't sell all of it.
No. Because I think, yes, Iran is still so important for Russia in so many ways, whether it's to do with Central Asian states or its access to the Middle East and everything. Professor, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I do apologize for the technical issues that we had. We will sort all of that out in editing. But also, I'd love to have you back one day. There's so many more things that I'd like to talk to you about, things that you touched upon. The situation in Syria, situation in Iraq, Libya, and even the relationships between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There's a lot to unpack. And I'd really appreciate your views on those things, because I really appreciated your analysis today. Before you go, is there any way people can follow your work? Do you have like a blog or a website or social media?
No, I'm not digitally, so no, I don't have a blog. I wish I had, but I'm a more of a well, I leave that promotion of ideas to people like yourself.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Professor, you've published a number of articles, including about the regime change or change of government in Iraq in 2003 and other very important topics. Where can people find those then?
Well, my articles were chapters of different books. I wrote a book that didn't really become so popular, but the name of it, the title of it was Insecurity Communities of South Asia and Middle East.
Oh, interesting.
And I talked about some of the stuff that I'm talking about right now. But I do have, as far as something, I do have, I did make a documentary. It's called Regime Change Wars, Consequences of U.S. Foreign Policy. It's on YouTube. If you like, you can, of course, it's kind of old now.
I'll look for it. I'll also, if I can find it, I'll leave a link to it in this show's notes as well. And I'll also get in touch with you offline. If I can help you in putting a blog together and putting your articles on, I'd love to do that. I think it'd be really beneficial for people.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, let's do that. Let's do that. Have a great day, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.